Artists and designers from the past continue to inspire artists today. With me is Luana Rubin. And let's talk a little bit about all of the artists that have inspired people today.
Gosh, you know, Van Gogh and Monet and even illustrators like Mucha and Maxfield Parrish, their influence is still with us today, not only in their hand, their illustrative or painting style, but also their color palettes.
And you travel a lot to different museums. You see that influence wherever you go, don't you?
I do. It's always a little shot of inspiration when I see the work of other artists and the colors that they use.
Yeah, and even in quilt shows, too, that you
Absolutely.
go to, you still see the influence there.
Oh, yes, and it keeps coming back again and again.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how quilters all over the world are constantly being influenced by simply going to an art museum.
And I think one of the artists that really shows up a lot is William Morris.
Yes, not only in museums, but in home dec and textiles and libraries and cathedrals. You can see his work all over the world when you travel.
And he was a fascinating man.
He really was. You know, he was really a Renaissance man because he worked not only with textiles and embroidery, but also murals and stained glass windows. He was a poet, a writer, and a publisher.
Mm-hmm. I love his philosophy that everything that you have in your house should be either beautiful or useful.
That's right.
Or both.
Right,
Yeah.
and that everyone deserved to have a beautiful home.
Nice, very nice. So tell me about some of the things you've seen. You mentioned some things you saw at quilt festivals, at Tokyo Quilt Festival?
Oh, yes. So there is one quilt in particular that I saw at the Tokyo Quilt Festival a couple of years ago that was a reimagining of a William Morris, of his classic acanthus design.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the acanthus leaves that were originally textiles and wallpaper, blown up huge, like 3 or 4 foot acanthus leaves in super bright colors. So it was really eye-popping. It was kind of like the psychedelic version of William Morris, but still very obviously William Morris.
Right. And there was an exhibit at the Metropolitan?
Yes, there have been textile exhibits, and also recently there was a pre-Raphaelite exhibit with his work with Edward Burne-Jones and Rossetti and some of the other pre-Raphaelite artists.
And I've also heard he had an exhibit or something at the Huntington Library?
That's
California?
right. Yeah, you know, there's a huge collection actually that is at the Huntington Library, an art collection.
Mm-hmm. And also at the Victorian Albert, I think I've seen.
The Victorian Albert, absolutely. He actually designed the Green Dining Room, and he was one of the first curators of the Victorian Albert Museum before it was renamed as it is today.
Okay. And so you've also seen his work in India, or influences in India?
Yes, I've looked at rugs. Well, they'll pull out a rug, and it's a reproduction of a William Morris botanical tree of life, something like that. Mm-hmm. And also recently I went to the Birmingham Quilt Festival, and I went to the Birmingham Art Museum, and the pre-Raphaelite galleries are there, and you can see works by him and the other artists. And also there's a portrait of his wife, Jane Morris, who was a great influence on all of those artists.
Yeah, and Jane really was the model used by a lot of the pre-Raphaelites, right?
That's right.
She was very influential, and her standard of beauty.
Right, her beauty was very different, and yet she became an icon of beauty because she had such an exotic, unusual beauty.
Mm-hmm. So how was Morris linked to the arts and crafts movement?
Well, really, the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood became the Morris firm. They went from being artists and dreamers to actually having a business, and then that later triggered the arts and crafts movement, which was about using natural dyes and things that you made yourself. It's really related back to that medieval concept that the maker's work would then flow to those who would use and appreciate the work of the maker, really related to our maker movement today.
And I know you have a quote from Kay Fassett about his influence on...
Right.
Or how he was influenced by Morris.
Yes. Yeah. And he says, the most remarkable thing about William Morris is that he dared to dream that everyday folk could live with aesthetically beautiful surroundings, and spent his life making that dream possible. I have taken his immense creative energy and inspired output as a jumping-off point for my own humble efforts. He fills me with a desire to achieve a similar dream every time I view his designs.
Oh.
Thank you, Cave.
Yeah, nice. Well, I know a lot of his work, almost all of his work, was based on botanicals.
Right. And I think he was not only inspired by botanicals, but just walking in the English countryside and English country gardens, but also medieval woodcuts and illustrated manuscripts and so on.
And his designs are really so reliable that even after 140 years, we still love them.
That's true. And, you know, he was considered a bit radical in the beginning when his work came out. And he insisted on, you know, he had this philosophy of everything being natural and authentic and made by hand. And, of course, over time, what was considered radical became what we consider classic or traditional because they have this timeless quality.
Right. So where are things going today? How are these designs being reinterpreted?
Well, they're being reinterpreted in so many interesting ways. They're being rescaled up or down. So, for instance, some of his wallpaper designs that may have been a larger scale have been scaled down for the quilt textile industry. But in the case of that Tokyo quilt, they've been scaled up. They can be recolored. They can be colored more tonal from what he originally did or more multicolor.
So let's look at some of his favorite patterns, his most iconic designs. And I know one of them is Strawberry Thief.
Absolutely.
This one.
Right.
This bird that I think he looked out his window and saw in his garden stealing his strawberries.
Right. What a great inspiration.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know sometimes, so this fabric really is authentically reproducing his design.
It is.
And then in some cases it can be scaled down.
Right.
Here, the same birds,
You
the
can
little
see
strawberries.
that.
Right.
Exactly.
And some of the other, we can slide some of those out here so we can see. And I know Willow, too, is another classic one.
Right, and here's another one up here. We have
and up in here.
several different color interpretations of that classic design.
Right. What about this one? I've seen this one before, too.
Right, and you can see this is the Chrysanthemums, and you can see that it's been done both in a kind of a toned down, tonal or blender type interpretation, then here's the larger scale multicolor. You know, it's more eye-popping.
Right. Okay, let's take a look at the quilts behind us here that have used these fabrics.
Beautiful quilts. So this one, the blue one, we love the border because it's really created kind of an engineered stripe out of a particular stripe of fabric that features the birds and the strawberries centered in the middle of the border. And you can see in the inner border that same Strawberry Thief design is used in a much smaller scale. And also, a lot of his work included applique and embroidery, and we have the applique stems on the flowers in the middle. That's really true to his vision.
Now, this one is a Mariner's Compass design.
And, you know, it has that eye-popping quality because it has almost complementary colors of that aqua blue and then that deep, rich red, and then the large-scale black and cream backing the points of the star. Really gives it a very visual, dramatic quality.
And the pillows all show, too, how well all those colors work together.
Yes, and you really get that sense of that classic color palette. This isn't a wild and crazy color palette. I think it's really more authentic.
Right. And so the collection of the fabrics brings together all the different colors and patterns so beautifully.
Yes, for sure. And, you know, I've been a fan of William Morris for many years, since I was 12 years old.
Well,
so
the traditions never die. They come back. Thank you so much. Let your imagination lead your quilting art in new directions when you make time for contemporary quilting every day.